Hi guys, how are you? I really miss you. So let's get started today. Text on page 59 from your book. And probably while in it, you found a lot of expressions with the words to and would. So today we are going to make a quick review about how to use these two words. In what situations do we need them? When can we use them? And when should not use them? Okay? So, just to remind you all, we use used to and would for about habits in the past. What is a habit? Well, something that we do repeatedly a certain number of times. And in this particular case, we are referring to habits that were from the past. Okay, so when do we use them specifically? Well, when we talk about repeated actions or habits in the past, but that they don't happen now. For example, you can easily say, I used to go to kindergarten because that is something that you don't do anymore. You don't go to kindergarten. That was a habit because you went to kindergarten for what? For 3 years, 2 years, right? But you don't go there anymore. So that is a perfect example on when we can use the expression used to or would. But something I cannot say is, for example, I used to go to school because you still go to school. So that is something that maybe you did in the past, but that you keep doing now. So in that case, it's not possible to use it. Why? Because the action it's still done in the present. Okay? You still go to school, you still go to English school at least. Well, not now because we're in quarantine, but you know what I mean. Okay? So is it clear? Hopefully, because I can hear you. So let's see. Now, used to and would, are they different? Are they synonym? Can we use them in the same situation? Is there a rule for one or the other? Take a minute, think about it, tell me. Take your time, remember what you learned in your previous semesters. So, what do you think? Are they different or are they synonyms? Can we use them exactly the same way? Or is there a little rule for using one or the other? Well, if you remember, congratulations. And if you don't worry, I will tell you right now. So, different or synonyms? They are actually different. What's the difference between one and the other? Well, that difference is up to the verb that we use with one or the other, okay? So, before we continue, let's talk a little bit about two different kinds of verbs in English. Well, actually in any language. In English, there are stative verbs that you can see in blue, and there are dynamic verbs that you can see in green. Do you know the difference? Have you ever heard the terms stative and dynamic? Well, so this is the difference. A state or a condition. What is a state or a condition? It is something that we don't know exactly when it starts and we don't know exactly when it finishes. For example, the verb be, it's a stative verb. Because, for example, if I say, well, I am a teacher. When did I start? I don't know, maybe in the past, many years ago. When will it finish? I don't know. I have no idea. The truth is that I am a teacher for a long period of time. That is my condition, right? We can say, for example, oh, I'm happy. When did it start? You don't know. When will it finish? You don't know. Or for example, you can say, well, I have a car. That is like a very long time. Because you're not going to have a car for like 2 minutes, right? You normally have a car for a couple of years or so. The verb believe, for example, I believe in God. When did you start? Do you know exactly? Not really. Will you ever stop? You don't know, right? All the verbs related to emotions like love, like hate. You don't know exactly when that started, and you don't know exactly when it will finish. The same with verbs like want, for example, know, understand, own, all those verbs that don't represent like a particular action, but more like a state or a condition, those are stative verbs. And then on the other side, we have the dynamic verbs. The dynamic verbs are, well, quite the opposite. They represent an action. I mean, something that implies that something is moving or something is changing. Like what, for example, eat. You can tell exactly when you start to eat, and you can tell exactly when you start to finish. That is not a state of your life. No, that is like a particular action, limited. It usually takes minutes or hours now in the quarantine. I don't know. A verb like go, for example, it's an action. It has a clear start and a clear ending. The same with actions like write, sleep, etc. Like run, jump, do. So all those verbs, they have like a clear starting and a clear ending. So those are the verbs that we call dynamic verbs, right? So why is that important when we are talking about habits in the past? Well, because depending on what kind of verb you're talking about for your past habit is the expression that you're going to use. You can use the expression used to with both dynamic and stative verbs. It's like the safest choice. If you don't remember, you go with used to. Because you can use them with stative verbs like I used to be a vegetarian. That is like a state, a period of your life, right? In which you were a vegetarian. It was not a particular action, but it was a state, a condition of you. Or you can say, I didn't used to eat meat. That is a dynamic verb, remember, eating. So we can use used to with stative and dynamic verbs. Just a little reminder of grammatic. Remember that the expression used to is in the simple past. So the verb next to it should go in infinitive, right? I used to be, for example. And if you want to make it in negative for a habit that you didn't have, like didn't used to, you use the auxiliary for the simple past. And obviously, the verb use doesn't take D anymore. I didn't use in infinitive, right? Please don't tell me I didn't used to because that's incorrect, right? Okay, so quedamos que used to both for stative and dynamic verbs. Now, let's talk about would. Would is a little bit more specific. We use would only for dynamic verbs. That is, for verbs that represent an action. Only an action. Something that has a clear starting and a clear ending. For example, in our book, right? You say they would all stand around eating and sighing. So they will all stand. Stand, it's a dynamic verb, right? I mean, they stood and then they sat down and that was it. It is completely incorrect to say, for example, like in here, I would be a vegetarian. That's incorrect because the verb be, it is a stative verb. So it is impossible to use it with would. So all the stative verbs are not possible to be used with would. Only dynamic verbs. So if we can use used to for both cases, why bother with would? Because if you use only used to, used to, used to, used to, used to during a narration, it's very boring, it's very tedious, and you sound like a very, basic English speaker. So you would be needing to, use one, use the other, etc. You can see the example in the text that you just read, right? In the cases that they use sometimes used to, but in others they use would. So conclusion, used to, both stative and dynamic verbs. That's safe. Any verb you want. Would only for dynamic. I would go to visit my grandmother. I would play with my dolls. I would eat my mom's cookies. Only dynamic verbs, no state. So, just one last thing. When not to use used to and would, well, we have two cases in which we cannot use them. We cannot use used to and would when we are talking about actions that only happen once or for a very limited period of time. For example, if you're talking about a trip and you said, I traveled to Canada when I was 15 years old, I mean, that means only one action, one time. So in that case, you don't need used to and would. You only need simple past. I traveled. For example, I broke my arm. I mean, that was not a habit. That was just something that happened once. Or for example, I went to a camp. Maybe it was like 2, 3 days, but it was only like a limited period of time. So in those cases, you only need to use the simple past. Don't bother with used to or would. Okay? For example, at the end in your book, you have the example, I tried oysters once. I mean, it only happened once. In those cases, we don't use the expression would or used to. And another situation in which you don't need to use them is when you're talking about something that you did in the past, but it's still true. For example, if you say something like, we have visited our grandparents every Sunday since I can remember. Like, it's a tradition, right, in Mexican families. Not now, because we're in quarantine. Don't visit your grandparents, please. But for example, we say we have visited our grandparents. I mean, you did it in the past, but if you still do it now, I mean, it started in the past, but it continues now, don't bother using used to or would. In this case, you can use the present perfect, right? It starts in the past, but it still affects the present perfect. We have visited our grandparents every Sunday since I can remember. Okay, so I hope it has been clear. Let me know. Text me if you got any question, right? And now it's your turn. Now you're going to write 4 sentences using would and 4 sentences using used to about your own habits in the past. Tell me a little bit of your story. That's going to be 8 sentences in total, right? And, put it in your file and send it to me at the end of the week. I hope it has been clear. See you soon, guys.